Natalie Bencivenga.
And I'm Tony Norman. And this is In Other News, the podcast that is not afraid to go there.
Where?
Anywhere the story takes us. You concerned about speaking your mind?
Me? Yeah, right. You?
Ha! Let's go, Nat.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of In Other News. Hey, Tony, how are you?
I'm doing great. Episode 8.
Episode 8.
And people said we would never get this far.
It's been a great run so far, and I'm really excited about this week's show. We have a lot of ground to cover, and we have a few updates to make. All right, so let's just jump right into it. Mastriano, your favorite of mine.
He is my favorite.
I know he is. I know.
I tell you, our own homegrown fascist. But let's not make judgments yet, though.
No, not at all. We're just calling it like we see it, people. So when we're talking about Mastriano, we wanted to continue the conversation because he's been, dabbling, if you were checking out last week's show, around the concept of running for the Senate. And it's been really interesting because he's really becoming sort of more favored by the Senate, and people like Lou Barletta, who they're moving away from sort of Trumpism and they're moving more towards this DeSantis straight up fascist way of being. And really? I think Mastriano really much more envelops that sort of energy. So yeah, he even had a rally a few days ago prior to this recording, and he had a few hundred people in a small town in southern central PA.
How does one even make sense of this? Because he lost the race for the governor by 15 points in Pennsylvania. You would think that that kind of humiliation would convince
It was only 15 points.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
It's all how you spin it, Tony.
But as he said, he's waiting for God and then I guess his wife to decide whether he's going to throw his hat in the ring again. And the
signs seem to be pointing maybe yes. That's kind of where we're headed.
So the return of Doug Mastriano, who would have thunk it after that humiliation the last year? But hey.
Here we are. But, it raises a lot of interesting points and questions because last week we were talking about Fetterman. And we were saying, he's not been well. He's been in Walter Reed. He has been working. There have been photos released by his team. He's doing okay. Hopefully he'll be out soon, according to his camp. But this doesn't seem to be enough for the Republicans. They want video.
They want proof of life.
They want proof of life. They want, they want a live stream of him on TikTok or something. I don't know. But point being, it's really starting to raise eyebrows on the Republican side of wanting to see him in the flesh.
Yeah.
And I find that all a little disturbing and concerning because if you look at the other side of it, we have Mitch McConnell, who fell recently at a dinner. He injured himself. He hurt his head. He broke a rib, and he's also, in the hospital. And I don't see any Democrats demanding to see proof of life from that person, which once again, just an interesting juxtaposition.
Well, there's a compassion gap, I think, between at least the partisans on both parties. And it's particularly disturbing about Fetterman, folks wanting to see proof of life. It's just that there's still an inability to extend any kind of compassion his way because he was able to vanquish their candidate in the last election. But that's life.
That's life. And, you said something when we were in pre-production that I really loved. You said that the Republicans have turned every vice into a
virtue and every virtue into a vice. And anyone who can be as honest as Fetterman is about what he's going through is considered weak because he is sharing something that is seen as politically vulnerable. And so, it's unbelievable.
So what's interesting to me is we're talking about vulnerability, and there's nothing more vulnerable right now than the state of Pittsburgh media. And we don't want to belabor this. We know a lot of people have been covering this, but because we were both reporters at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for many years, we felt remiss if we didn't touch on this. And we just want to acknowledge what happened, that a union member was assaulted by a contracted worker during an altercation, and it became very ugly. And the union member is now was hospitalized and
broken jaw.
With a broken jaw,
and with no health care.
Well, and this is what is so ironic, because they were striking
Right.
for a $19
Right.
increase, to be paid by the blocks for their healthcare, and this has now landed someone in the hospital.
Right.
And as we know, the blocks aren't going to feel any repercussions. They weren't the one that threw the blow, but everything's coming to, I think, a fevered pitch here, and it needs to be addressed immediately. What are your thoughts?
You can actually feel that. You can really feel that fever coming on, to use your word. And it really is discouraging. But I'm still, and we're both still standing with the union, the Newspaper Guild of Pittsburgh. But it's just so darn depressing.
It is.
To see what's going on, because, the Post-Gazette really should be an asset to all, especially the folks who work there. And what's going to happen when this strike is over, assuming that the paper is still, still exists intact. Yeah. So, I mean, how are these folks going to work together again?
Well, that's what really concerns me. And hopefully they can really come to a resolution here sooner than later, because this is only going to continue to intensify. And things are heating up all over the city, it seems, if we want to talk about things getting intense. Yeah. For example, the University of Pittsburgh, where I went to school, and I love Pitt, there's going to be some anti-trans speakers on campus. These are not university-sanctioned events, but there are going to be 2 events from Turning Point USA, a right-wing youth group. An event called Save Women's Sports is going to feature Riley Gaines, a swimmer who advocates for the exclusion of trans women from women's sports. And the petition claims the event is scheduled for the first day of Pitt Pride Week. And there's a second event that's going to take place at the O'Hara Student Center. And this is going to be a debate on transgenderism and womanhood. And this that word transgenderism was coined by Michael Knowles, a conservative activist who recently called for the eradication of transgender people from public life. This is going to be really intense.
It's the cynicism of the GOP and of the conservative social movement is really evident in all of this. The intensity of the attacks on trans people is really un-American in every way. And it is basically a replay of what was said about Black people in the 50s and the 60s, under Jim Crow. And this sort of impulse to just sort of exclude people and otherize people really is, the worst aspect of the American character.
It really is. And we actually contacted the University of Pittsburgh's media relations to get their thoughts on this. And we asked them, why are they allowing these events to take place? But they said, as a public university, they uphold the principles of protected speech and expression and acknowledge that legally protected speech and expression can at times offend and marginalize some members. And then we also asked them, what are the University of Pittsburgh's policies on deciding who can or cannot hold events? They said the university does not censor who gets invited to campus by student organizations. But I think the most interesting question that we asked, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, would Pitt allow like a KKK group or a neo-Nazi group to hold events on campus? And their response was, we cannot speculate on hypothetical future scenarios.
Yeah, it seems like when it comes to just sort of moral questions, universities are becoming more and more reluctant to take a stand. They're thinking about legal remedies as opposed to morality. They should have been able to say, we would discourage anyone wanting to bring hate groups onto the campus, but they can't bring themselves to even say that.
Yeah, just like a little bit of a stronger stance.
Yeah,
but who is taking a stronger stance are the students. And so what they're doing is they're going to be bringing Dylan Mulvaney. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's a big TikTok star. And she is going to be here during Pitt's Pride Week, March 26th through April 7th. And I thought that was a great way to say, hey, you know what? We can have our voice heard as well. So hopefully that event will get a much larger crowd.
It probably will. I'm not big on TikTok, so I don't know who anyone is.
Tony, it's okay. I'll keep you up to speed. But there are a lot of communities that are under attack these days. And coming up in the drill down, we're going to be talking with scholar Andre Perry and his conversation around Black communities and how they can grow their economic wealth towards the idea of equity.
Exactly. He's one of the most enlightened scholars in the country about this issue, and he's from Wilkinsburg. So we're talking to a homegrown scholar about things that are happening here and across the country.
All right, so stay tuned.
You're listening to In Other News.
Thanks for joining us. All right, we are back for the drill down, and I'm very excited for our guest today. We are with Andre Perry. He is a scholar with the Brookings Institution, and he is also the author of Know Your Price. And Tony, you introduced me not only to Andre, but to this book.
It's a fantastic book. It's one of those books that really should be required reading, especially for Pittsburghers. Andre Perry is actually from Wilkinsburg, and this book is a political manifesto, call to arms, and in many ways it's also a memoir, a miniature memoir, because it gives us a background on Andre Perry and his thinking and how he thinks we should be looking at and analyzing the predicament of the African American community today. And he doesn't engage in pathologies. And so, Andre, I just want to say thank you for this book. I'm going to make sure that it becomes a bestseller, brother. You're from Pittsburgh. We should all, at least here in Pittsburgh, we should all have a copy of it. So
that's what I think. That's what I think.
There you go.
When you're born, you get a terrible towel and you get a copy of Know Your Price.
I like that juxtaposition. I think that's good.
That's a good combo. It makes sense to me. Let's talk a little bit about economic investment in the African American community. The subtitle of your book is Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. And that is an intro to your thinking, which is, hey, our communities are undervalued, our homes, our property, our lives even. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, nothing grows without investment. I don't care if you're talking about education, community development, economic development, jobs. It requires a level of investment for growth. One of my favorite sayings in all the world is that when you're growing a head of lettuce and the lettuce is not growing, you don't blame the lettuce. You look to see if it's getting sunlight. You look to see if it's getting rainwater. You look to see if the soil is enriched. You never blame the lettuce. But when things go wrong in Black communities, we blame Black people. We effectively blame the lettuce. And I know this too well because I grew up in Wilkinsburg. So if anything ever happened, it was the people's fault. Children not living with their fathers. It was drugs and things like that. And certainly, I believe all those things contribute to the uplift or not of a community. However, we don't look at the overarching structures that lead to levels of investment or divestment
Right.
In communities overall. So what I try to do in this book is really provide stories around the data that I produce at the Brookings Institution to provide context to things, these lofty terms called housing devaluation and economic development, agglomeration and clustering, all these like fancy terms, placemaking. But I try to put sort of a real world face on it, and so that so people can really see and feel what is going on around them.
Right. And your stories, your tales are so accessible, and the numbers are consequently, they mean something. I mean, this is not a book that requires a person having a, like a grasp of, like statistics. This is a book that requires a reader having a heart and listening to the numbers in context. And you tell many wonderful stories. About growing up in Wilkinsburg and just how coming of age, in the home of a matriarch that you didn't even have common blood with, but who took you and other people in, who became your mother, and you showed how the African American community has figured out ways to accommodate people who would more or less be tossed aside otherwise. And I wonder, like, um, how do these stories resonate to people outside of this area? I mean, you moved me to tears a couple times.
Well, thank you. Well, not for crying, but thank you for feeling my writing. But I think I share a universal story, and I start off by talking about how I was informally adopted by this older woman in the hood. I was born in 1970, and most people in Pittsburgh know that that was around the time U.S. Steel started to pull out. We had massive unemployment. I mean, I think that it was a high of maybe 20% in Allegheny County, which that the black rate, if it's 20% for everyone, then it's extraordinarily high for the black population.
40-50% for the black
Yeah,
population, probably.
Under normal circumstances, the black unemployment rate is almost always twice that of the white rate. Now, I also lived in a neighborhood that was predominantly, or borough, Wilkinsburg, that was predominantly black. And so I have this story, and not to mention, I need to also make clear that one of the reasons why my mother or my mom had to take me in was my father. He was a heroin addict. He was in and out of prison and eventually murdered inside of Jackson State Penitentiary, right outside of Detroit, where my paternal family is from. But for the book, Know Your Price, I looked at the built environment in which they lived. And so I started looking at the history. We know that both mom and my father lived in neighborhoods that were redlined, where the federally backed Homeowners Loan Corporation drew red lines around predominantly black neighborhoods, deeming them unworthy for various federal investments. They were subject to the highway construction displacing them. In fact, mom had to move from the Hill District to Wilkinsburg because she was pushed out by the building of the Civic Arena and 375. But then I started looking at today's home values in those areas in which they lived. In both, my father lived in Detroit, and my mom lived ended up in Wilkinsburg. So I looked at home values, but I looked at home values all across the country, comparing homes in predominantly black places where the share of the black population is 50% or higher, and compared them to places where the share of the black population was less than 1%. And on average, homes in black communities are half as much as homes in white communities. However, most people will say that's because of education and crime. But those are things you can control for in a study, and that's what we did. We took that absolute list price and we controlled for, and what I mean by control, we try to create an apples to apples comparison. So all things being equal. So equal educational levels, equal crime levels. What is the list price then? And then what we found is pretty much astounds that homes in black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about 48,000 per home, about 156 billion in lost equity across the country. Now, and I'll be very brief. Why is that important? 156 billion. 156 billion would have financed more than 4 million black-owned businesses based upon the average amount black people use to start their firm. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based upon the average amount of a four-year public education, replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over, covered nearly all the damage of Hurricane Katrina, and it's double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. It's a big number. So the reason why I say that last number about the opioid crisis, if my father lived in a neighborhood where the home values were at the market rate or the white rate, he would have had greater opportunity to go to college, greater opportunity to start a business. His drug use probably wouldn't be criminalized, let's be honest. His life and my life would have been fundamentally different. And so, and that's why I say all the time that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. That we have to look at the policies that extract wealth, opportunity, and investment first and foremost.
So thank you for all of that. That actually was very chilling hearing all of those statistics. And we say it so often on this show, poverty really is a policy choice. So when you're looking at a neighborhood like Wilkinsburg, for example, and you're hearing all of this, for a while, annexation was the topic of discussion. And now, of course, that has, it's dead in the water. But with something like Wilkinsburg possibly being absorbed by a larger city like the city of Pittsburgh, is that something that you think, and I know this is hypothetical, that could have been good for the community, or would that have just compounded problems?
Well, there's pluses and minuses to merging, but this is the other reality. Pittsburgh itself has Black neighborhoods that are not doing well. I mean, it's always been about how do you treat people, not necessarily um, what kind of governance structures can you use. I certainly do believe that many small municipalities should share services with other municipalities. I mean, the days in which small steel towns essentially could finance all these services, those days are over. So we do need new systems. The idea that we should have the same systems over centuries, that doesn't really hold, and is bearing out. I mean, in fact, Pittsburgh certainly shares certain educational services, waste services, and other things. So I certainly believe we should start thinking about new ways of governing. But with that said, when I look at Homewood, I don't see much. I mean, a lot going for it in terms of the Black population. It's not like being in Pittsburgh is necessarily inherently that much better. Um, and so I say, as you create systems, and the proof point should not be, can you create more efficient fire? Is it going to increase the economic and community outcomes for Black residents? Because right now, that's the real issue. I mean, we have um, a, a, a wanting tax base because we have lower employment. Folks aren't getting paid; they're just due. There's a lot of different human development things that need to occur.
Where do reparations fit in for you in all of this?
I'm a proponent of reparations, and I'm certainly a proponent of local reparations. I think however you feel, that the reason why you get that 23% difference in home values largely because we've structurally devalued Black assets in Black neighborhoods. There's a penalty or a Black tax because in general we view Black neighborhoods as undesirable. Um, and and that has robbed people of millions of dollars. And so there's so many programs that we can talk about: slavery, Jim Crow racism, housing discrimination, education discrimination, that literally rob Black people of money that they should receive. So I do believe in reparations. I also believe that local governments, as well as the federal government, has a role in paying reparations. But I also believe in having a reparative culture. That meaning that we need to start acknowledging where structural racism exists. We need to figure out ways to restore value that's been extracted by racism, to end discrimination where we detect it. And when we do that at the local level, it'll work its way up to the federal level. And that's largely been the debate. Do you have reparations from the federal government or local? I think both. But I also think, policies of exclusion didn't necessarily start with the federal government. Some did, but many really bubbled up from the local government. Redlining came out of Baltimore, and it was resourced and codified in the federal government, but it started in Baltimore. So we need reparative policies at the local level that find their way up to the national level. And it can start at Wilkinsburg. It can start in Pittsburgh. But it needs to start.
It does need to start, that is for sure. And we were thrilled to have you on. And as we wrap this up, we have to ask you one final question, because we've been talking a lot about what's going on in Florida and around the country with a 4-letter word, woke. And so we want to ask you what you think about the idea of a woke city or a woke bank, and how does that fit into, economic prosperity around the ideas of wokeness?
Well, what I've come to appreciate being woke is this being socially conscious.
Right.
And we do need to be socially conscious, whether you're talking about being aware of injustices around you, racial injustices, and how climate is changing, to gender inequality, knowing that women are not paid at the same level. We just celebrated or memorialized Women Pay Day a few days before this recording. So I think that, there's nothing wrong with being socially conscious. We should be. And so, but I also think that the term is thrown around so much without real meaning. But it's always important to correct the jargon and let people know that at the root that it means to be socially conscious.
I'm just smiling because he quickly and easily summed up what woke meant. Socially conscious, like in two words. And we've been, having a lot of trouble getting a definition out of the Republicans. So I just found that fascinating. How quickly, Andre, you were just like, yeah, it's just being socially conscious, and you were just on it. So we appreciate you so much sharing your thoughts. We're really excited about this book, Know Your Price.
Folks, Know Your Price.
Yeah.
Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. You can find it at all the finest bookstores in Pittsburgh.
Wherever fine books are sold.
That's right. And on Tony's shelf, too. Thank you again, Andre. We hope we can have you back. There's so much more to talk about. You're listening to In Other News.
Thanks for tuning in.
All right. Well, here we are in final thoughts. And it was so great to talk with Andre and his thoughts on the word woke. But you were talking to me about the historical context of that word and of what it means. And I don't think a lot of people understand the roots of it.
Right. Woke is one of those words that's been appropriated from the African-American vernacular. It stretches back to the 20s. Some folks say it stretches even on back to the post-antebellum era. Wow. But we first have a recording of it, and Leadbelly, the folk singer, he has a recording that came out in the early 30s, in which on the last sentence says, stay woke, and it was something that was picked up by other folk singers and blues singers. And finally, in the 2000s by Erykah Badu, the pop singer, and then it was picked up by Black Lives Matter. And it's all about enlightenment and becoming aware of the social structures that are holding you down. So the very idea of staying woke means simply to become aware of the conditions that affect your life. It is something that appeals to everyone, regardless of your color. But it's become a term of derision. It's been weaponized by the right wing to try to make us feel bad about being aware of things of social injustice. It's crazy.
Well, what's fascinating now is that it's even reached the banks.
Yes.
This idea of the woke bank, this idea of diversifying boards and giving money potentially to Black people or to women or to other minorities. And that somehow could, destroy the economy. You don't want to be part of a woke bank.
I have all of my money in a woke bank.
Watch
PNC,
out.
Politically incorrect.
But, for all kidding aside, what makes me nervous about this whole conversation, Tony, and the debate around this idea is Ron DeSantis really has been the one in Florida that has taken up this mantle for this word woke and has said things like Florida is where woke goes to die. And if you extract what you were just saying, that means Florida is where you go to stay ignorant.
Right.
It's where equity and inequality go to die. That's very, very concerning. And now, as we heard with Perry speaking about how like redlining started locally and it's spread, right, out of Baltimore, this idea of anti-wokeness is really starting to spread, and it's becoming very reminiscent of Nazi Germany in the 30s.
Right.
Which is ironic because that's when this phrase was originally sort of started to use.
Yeah, I mean,
too.
it was used by, one of the greatest blues singers and folk singers of all time in the early 1930s. And he heard it from his community, folks who were, born in the 1860s, 1870s, and so forth. So it has this lineage, and it might even go back further than that, So woke is not a cuss word.
No.
We should embrace it and understand that it's only about enlightenment. And if you want to stay ignorant, just say, hey, I'm not woke, I'm asleep.
That's a really good way of looking at it. Well, we've got plenty of ways to help people stay woke, get woke, all the ways. And we've got action items for you that we're going to share at the bottom of this episode. So you can just check those out on Next Pittsburgh and on our YouTube channel. And Tony, until next time, I hope you stay woke. I have no doubt that you will.
Might as well.
Might as well. You've come this far. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye. In Other News is a presentation of Next Pittsburgh and is proudly produced by us, along with our amazing team, Emma Honcharski and Margie Ruttenberg. Our editor is Sorgatron Media, and original music by Jack Swing.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please like and share this episode and rate and review us wherever you're listening. It really helps us grow. And if you're listening on the Next Pittsburgh website, take a minute to take a look around to learn more about all the cool stuff happening in our hometown.